Oh hey, check this out. It's a tiny little motorcycle. It's made entirely out of paper clips. Like the wheels turn and everything on this thing. Look how tiny that is. Like how cool is that? So a while ago, I got a box of these little miniature trinkets from my grandpa. He gave them to me with the intent of having me photograph them. You see, he got all these little knickknacks from an old friend of his named Omar Defini from Cordoba, Argentina. My grandpa and the rest of my mom's family used to live in Argentina. They lived there for a few years back in the 80s. Now, Omar made all of these little bikes from nothing more than just the wire that makes up paper clips. Now, all of these bikes are obviously teeny tiny. So we're going to be doing some macro photography to be able to capture them exactly the way that I'm imagining. That way we can see all of the tiniest, intricate little details that are on these tiny little motorbikes. Now we're going to be using some pretty specific techniques here to be able to do this, such as focus stacking, which we'll talk about when we get down into the studio. So without any further delay, let's head on downstairs to the studio and let's get set up to take some of these photos. So we're down here in the studio, we're all set up and ready to go. Let me run through real quick what my exact setup is here and what I'm doing to achieve the shots that I'm looking for. So for my camera system, I'm shooting on the trusty Canon 6D. Yeah, I wish I had something that was a little higher megapixel. This thing's only 21.2, I believe, but I don't know, I like the Canon 6D. It's a good camera, it's a little bit older, but it's never failed me yet. So I'm shooting on the 6D, and then I'm also shooting on the Canon EF 100mm lens. So this is an awesome macro lens. You can get really, really close to your subject and super, super sharp. It's an awesome lens all the way around. The 100mm lens isn't actually mine though. It's Luke's. I'm borrowing it. Thanks, Luke. And then as far as my actual setup here, my actual staging goes, it's pretty simple. I don't have anything really glamorous going on here. I mean, our studio is built out of a kind of half-finished basement. If you've watched the podcast yet, like that's the mostly finished side, and this is the unfinished side of the basement. There's a table here. It's made out of a door, and then I have this piece of shelving on here, this white piece of shelving that I'm using as my background. Now, typically when you're doing a shot like this, where you have something that's against a white background, and it's very minimalist, almost fine art, it almost works better to shoot it as kind of like a flat lay. But in this instance, where the bikes stand up, I'm not shooting it as a flat lay, I'm shooting it on an angle. And because of the way that I have this set up, where I have this long white board, and then I have this light angled towards the board like this, it kind of gives the illusion that this bike is sitting against a white background as like a flat lay. Because this white board back here, it's not really going to be, it's not going to be, there's nothing to focus on. It's completely white. So it's going to give the illusion of a flat lay photo, which is super cool. That's what I'm going for right here. Yeah, so that's my setup. Let's start getting into talking about how we're going to shoot this, what we're going to be looking for, how we're going to focus stack it, and yeah, let's jump on in. Now to start off, there's a few basic concepts that I want to talk about that kind of go hand in hand with macro photography, and the first one being depth of field. Now your depth of field is going to be determined by three things. It's going to be your aperture, it's going to be the proximity of your subject to your actual lens, and it's going to be your focal length. Now one thing that's interesting about macro photography that makes it a little bit unique compared to regular forms of photography, maybe even makes it a little bit more technical, is that you're going to get a shallow depth of field almost no matter what. Doesn't matter what aperture you're shooting at, whether it's f8, f11, f16, you're always going to get a shallow depth of field that looks like you're shooting at f1.2 or f2.8, any of those wider depth of fields. Now this happens because of a concept called the 1-to-1 ratio. Now the 1-to-1 ratio is when the physical object that you're shooting shows up as the exact same size on your sensor in the image. Now a good example that a lot of people like to use with this is the example of a quarter. So if you're shooting a macro photo of a quarter, that quarter in real life is going to be the exact same size as it shows up on your sensor when you take the image. And if your subject is half the size that it is in real life, then that would be a 1-to-2 ratio. And if it's a third of the size, 1-to-3, so on and so forth. And you can obtain that 1-to-1 ratio on your lens when you put it at that minimal focal distance. And your minimal focal distance is just how close your subject can physically be to your lens without it not being able to focus anymore. A good example of this is if you take your hand up and you move it towards your eye, there comes a point where your eye's not able to focus on your hand anymore because it's too close. The same thing happens in lenses. Macro lenses you can typically get a lot closer than you can with regular lenses. And that's why you can obtain that 1-to-1 ratio. And when you're in that 1-to-1 ratio, your depth of field works a lot different than it does when you're working at wider distances. So how do we deal with this issue with our shallow depth of field? Well, that's where focus stacking comes into play. Now, focus stacking is when you take a series of photos at different focal distances or at different points of focus in your scene, and then you take those photos and you put them into Photoshop or whatever software you're using and combine them so that you have an image that's sharp, front to back, all the way through. All your different points end up coming out completely sharp. This is a technique that's used a lot in landscape photos. There's a lot of times where you're taking a photo of a foreground element that's really close to your lens, so you need to focus on that foreground element, and then you also need to focus on whatever your background element is as well. So if a lot of people do this where you take a photo of a cactus right next to your lens, and you take all of your different focus points of this cactus, and then you start moving up the image, and you take photos of different rocks and whatnot, and mountains, whatever's in the background, and then you take those into Photoshop, combine them all, and now your landscape photo is completely sharp, front to back, foreground to background, and I'm just hitting things over here. Now, focus stacking is obviously a creative decision. In this photo, I want to have everything sharp front to back. That's just how I want to style it. There are a lot of cases where keeping a really shallow depth of field really complements the mood, style, and message of whatever the photo is that you're taking, and having only tiny parts of your photo in focus really almost adds more to your image than having everything in focus might. It just depends on whatever the image is, and it depends on whatever you're going for with the image that you're deciding to create. So with that all being said, let me show you exactly what I'm doing in camera so you can see what my settings are and what the process looks like firsthand for doing a focus stack of this little bike right here. Okay, so I have my little bike here framed up in camera, and as far as settings go, I'm shooting at a 1/8 shutter speed, and then my f-stop is set to 8. I'm keeping my ISO at 100, that way I can keep as low noise as possible. I don't want this to be super grainy, I want it to be really sharp and really clean. And the reason I'm shooting at f8 still, despite having to still do a focus stack, is I want to try to make that focus stack a little less intense if I can. So while I am still going to have to do one, I don't have to do as many photos in a row to make it happen. And I could drop it down, you know, to 3.5 and then bring my shutter speed up a little bit. But I'm shooting tripod, so I don't need to have a higher shutter speed. I can get away with having a slower aperture and then slower shutter speed, and then I can bring my aperture up to f8, making it so I don't have to do as intense of a focus stack. We might actually go up just for exposure purposes to f9. Okay, so if we zoom in here, you can see that while this front spring right there is in focus, if I adjust my focus just slightly, it moves that exhaust pipe into focus. And the distance between that front center spring and that exhaust pipe, obviously it's not an exhaust pipe, it's just a piece of wire. It's meant to look like the exhaust pipe, but the distance between those is absolutely minor. I mean, it's maybe a centimeter, but because we're shooting within that 1-to-1 ratio, actually with this, I believe we're shooting at closer to a 1.2 ratio, but it's still shallow enough that no matter what our aperture is, and despite the fact that we're shooting at f9, those tiny little increments of space are still going to be out of focus from each other. So what we're going to do is we'll focus on that back spot, and we're just going to work our way back to front. So that looks good. We'll take our shot. Okay, looking good. Zoom in again, bring it forward. All right, bring it forward one more time, focus on that front element right there, and bam. Okay, and we're gonna go down here to this kickstand because the kickstand is further back from everything else. And we're going to, whoops, we're still in the image. We're going to focus on that. Come back in focus. We'll zoom back out just a tad. Come down here to that kickstand. And we'll put that guy in focus. All right, and then the last little piece of this bike that we're going to take a photo of, just so that we can get everything in focus, is going to be this handlebar. And this is because this part specifically on the bike is what is closest to us. It's closer to us than any other part on the rest of the bike, so we need to get an image of it so that we can get a full focus stack. So we'll go here and make sure that we are focused. And okay, looks good. All right, and that's our photo. Okay, so with that being said, I am going to finish shooting the rest of these bikes, and then I'm gonna take those photos up to the office. I'm gonna put them in Photoshop, get them all stacked up, do a quick edit on them. Everything should be pretty good in camera. I don't think there's gonna be too much of an edit necessarily, other than some basic adjustments. So it's gonna be pretty simple. So we'll get those up there, get them put onto the computer, and we'll see you in the office. Okay, so we're back up in the office, and it's late. It's like, I don't know, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night right now. Been working on those photos, got them all focus stacked and everything. Put them up here on the screen. We'll kind of talk about them. So we have this first photo, this little red bike. I love how this turned out. I think it's probably my favorite of the bunch that we got today. Everything's tack sharp all the way through. I love how it's isolated against that white background. Makes it just feel really like a fine art image. And I think it's really cool. I don't know, it's different than anything I've ever really done before. I don't have any other photos that look like that. All my stuff is typically, you know, landscape photos or product photos, lifestyle photos, everything like that. So I've never really done something like that before. And yeah, I love how it turned out. So I got that one with the red bike, or the one with the red wheels. And then there's this photo of this gold bike, which I thought turned out really cool. Again, everything's tack sharp all the way through. Love how that gold looks against the white background. And then finally there's this silver bike, which to me kind of looks like in my mind, it looks like a Ghost Rider bike. Like it's really like kind of aggressive looking and really mean. And I think it's super cool. And I feel like it has kind of a different feel to it, despite it being on the exact same medium as the other bikes. I just feel like it has such a cool, aggressive look to it. And yeah, I don't know, I think it might be one of my favorites. The red one is definitely my favorite, but that silver one, the Ghost Rider bike as I keep calling it, I think it's super cool. So I think it's probably my favorite or one of my favorites of the bunch. So yeah, this was super cool. I love doing macro photography, anything that's super close, pulling out all the fine details and textures that you don't easily see with the human eye. So it was super awesome. And I love how the photos turned out. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna print one of them at some point, maybe all of them, I don't know. I just think they're super cool. And it's also a little bit of a sentimental thing just because these are my grandpa's collectibles. And I don't know, I think my grandpa's a super cool dude and he's got a lot of really cool stuff. I think we should do this again at some point because yeah, this was cool. But for right now, I'm gonna go to bed because I am pretty dang tired. It's been a long day, got a lot done though. And had a lot of fun taking these photos. And photos are super fun, but it can be a little tiring. So it's kind of a long process. But before I go, be sure to go follow us on YouTube, subscribe, like the video, go ahead and comment, which bike photo was your favorite. So like I said, mine personally is that little red bike with the red wheels. I think that's probably my favorite. I think that turned out, I like how it turned out better than the other ones, even though I really like the Ghost Rider bike. So I don't know if you're a big fan of the Ghost Rider bike, go tell me you're a big fan of the Ghost Rider bike because I think it's pretty dang cool. So but yeah, go subscribe, go like the video, go follow us on Instagram @RealBushwhackers. Go check out our website, realbushwhackers.com. Got a lot of cool stuff on there. Lots of new things coming throughout the year. So always stay tuned for that. It's kind of a crazy time right now with Bushwhackers. Got a lot going on, going through a little bit of a transitional period, and so a lot of cool things to look forward to. So keep an eye out. Okay, I'm gonna go to bed, but I hope all of you have a great night, have a great day, wherever you're at, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's a good one, and I'll see you soon on the next one, probably at some point. Bushwhackers out.